Hello, everyone, and welcome to this talk with the Metchosin Foundation. I am Helen Fletcher, the Vice President of the Metchosin Seniors Association. We are excited to be hosting this series through our Seniors Center Without Walls pilot project. I'd like to acknowledge that Metchosin residents are living in, and this Zoom meeting is coming to you from, the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people. I'd like to specifically acknowledge the territory of our neighbors at Shuanu First Nation and to express appreciation for the good relationships that are being built between neighboring communities. Before we begin, there's a few housekeeping items. This event will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel, Metchosin Seniors, and that will probably be posted later on today. Please keep your microphones muted unless you have a question for the panel. And we will allocate time at the end of the program for your questions and look forward to hearing them. The Metchosin Foundation was formed in 2008 and has adopted the vision, Healthy Lands and Waters, the foundation for a healthy community. The foundation undertakes and supports initiatives to improve environmental protection, stewardship, and education. Today, our panel will respond to the following questions. Why and how was the foundation created? What are some of the foundation's key successes over the past 14 years? What are your future goals? What challenges and opportunities have you identified? And how can Metchosin residents support and get involved? Our guests today from the board of the Metchosin Foundation are Chris Pratt. Do you want to show them now? Chris Pratt, Morgan Yates, and Valerie Jaeger.
One left.
I'll ask each of you to introduce yourselves and then begin by telling us about how the foundation got started.
I guess speaking first, Metchosin is well known in my family life. I had my first birthday on Weirs Beach, and although I was away from Metchosin for a number of years in the Navy, I was very happy to return here in 1978 and have been here since then and get involved just with the organizations which we'll turn to later that keep Metchosin active and busily engaged.
Okay, so I'm Valerie, and I've been in Metchosin since 2018, 40 years after Chris. And we came here, my husband and I, largely because we love big trees and it felt like home. So where we came from in Niagara, we were both physicians. I was medical officer of health and had done a fair bit with the Brock University Board of Trustees, United Way of Niagara, and the Niagara Community Foundation. And I was attracted to the Metchosin Foundation because I have a very large spot in my heart for foundations. I think they're very special entities and are the opportunity for individuals and communities in a community to work together and achieve something that's much greater than the sum of our individual parts.
Okay, and I'm Morgan Yates, and I'm the Vice President of the Metchosin Foundation. And I guess the roots for me would have started in my very happily feral childhood on the edges of Greater Vancouver. Growing up really loving nature. Although my academic background, I'm a professional engineer. And my wife and I were childhood sweethearts or high school sweethearts in Greater Vancouver. We always knew we wanted to make our way to the island, but we took a very large detour through Calgary for about 30 years. We bought our property here in Metchosin in 2009, but didn't move in and build our home until 2015. And not long thereafter, I was encouraged to begin learning about our local volunteer organizations and was drawn into the Metchosin Foundation. And I'm pleased to be a director. Thanks. Okay, Helen or Lori, if you want to bring up our slide deck now and put that on screen share, we can start to go through the first item, which was the history of the foundation. I think Chris will lead that.
I can go on talking without pictures. So I know this is a presentation is for Metchosin seniors particularly, but for all Metchosinites in general. So let's go back to the beginning of Metchosin as a rural district, which is in 1984. And our motive for incorporating as a rural district was that we had been invited to join with Colwood, which was still unincorporated, to have a sewerage system. And we saw no need for that in our larger properties in Metchosin. But the way to dodge that bullet was to incorporate. And Herman Woke was our first mayor, if you remember, and he was, we did have a fire department in those days, so he was both the fire chief and the mayor to begin with. But John Rands, when he retired, was able to offer for mayor and became mayor for a great number of years and has only just retired, as you know. We have people who were in at the beginning whose names have now been lost because of time, and an important person was somebody called David Walsk. And he was someone who I think was American. I didn't know him very well, but he said that for Metchosin to become a community, we needed three things. We needed a community house, and we needed a community newspaper, and we needed a foundation. There were other recently returned Metchosinites who picked up on those threads, and those who had lived here. And it was Joe Mitchell who early on, and her husband Frank, of course, who picked up on David Walsk's suggestion. And we happened to have a little bungalow on our municipal grounds that was bringing in a small monthly rent. We approached John Rands and said that would just do very nicely as a community house. That took a little bit of visualizing on John's part, but indeed there it is, and you know how important the community house is to the community. Similarly with the Metchosin News, the volunteers came forward, and our monthly paper became extant. The Metchosin Foundation was a tougher problem because it was, as we'll go on talking, we'll understand that dust doesn't grow on trees. But we did have the encouragement of the Victoria Foundation, quite one of Canada's oldest foundations, and incidentally one of its wealthiest, to help us get started on that. But the thought of going around and knocking on doors and asking for money to put a foundation together just didn't quite seem to click with the the Metchosin atmosphere. But there was another person whose name came forward who said that that was nothing. He was a professional money raiser, and we should be brave and go ahead. And that was Dan Spinner. So with that sort of basic armament and a very active Morley Milne of blessed memory, we got going. There was a small organization that she had started. We met in the schoolhouse, as a matter of fact, which we called the Green and Blue Association. And Joel Usry was involved in that too. We were wondering how to get the message across to the public that we have a treasure in our hands in this municipality, and what can we do to preserve it? It was Morley's idea that we build a model of the whole municipality with its hills and dales and streams and lakes, and make it available in the community, in the municipal house, and available for school children. We always had a view of bringing up young people to appreciate where they were going to be living. But Dan Spinner then became our leader. As we say, the finances were the uppermost in our mind. Dan McIsaac joined. Dan did not take a special office because he was busy with his practice at that time. And Morley, as we've mentioned, and Joe Mitchell. So those were the beginnings. And we talked with Morley's vision of keeping the land absolutely undeveloped, that we were looking for tracts of land that we could put covenants on. We had no money to organize the covenants, but at least we were looking for the lands. And that occupied us until the day came when we had achieved our status as a tax-free recipient of donations, and that was the turning point when Dan O'Connor took us to his office, and we celebrated that occasion. Once we were able to give receipts for donations, we felt that we were getting on to firmer ground. I will say that Dan O'Connor has continued to be our representative legally and to support us with our turns there. He also, very quietly, if you have a deposition to make that needs a notary's signature, Dan has been donating the proceeds of his duties from his office to our funds, and he continues to be our strong advisor when we stay within the boundaries of law.
Chris, can we build on that as we
By
simply
all
the next topic?
means.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so thank you, Chris. We wanted to just build on that a little bit to provide a bit of distinct recognition for some of our distinct founders. And as I do that, Lori and Helen, as our chairpersons for the meeting, I wonder if you could bring up the second slide in our slide deck, which is really the order of topics that we're going to discuss today. So as you're doing that, really, I think we wanted to give a shout out to Joe Mitchell, because Joe was so very central to the early organization in 2007, the local conversations that occurred. She's someone who really deserves recognition for getting us up and running. And then, as Chris has pointed out, Dan McIsaac was very, very involved early on. Dan helped us write our Constitution. He submitted our registration forms. And to Chris's point, Dan McIsaac has also been very generous in providing us with pro bono legal support and annual contributions since we were formed. Other notables, I guess, would certainly include Morley Milne, Chris Pratt himself, certainly Dan O'Connell as well. Carol Carmen was there in the early days as well, as was Frank Mitchell. So to the extent that we are now directors in a successful nonprofit, we are standing on the shoulders of those good people. Valerie, I don't know if you wanted to add.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that that many of these people were present at the beginning and are still present and very active with us, for which we are very grateful. Dan is quite good. We always remember to ask Mr. McIsaac whether we can or cannot do X, Y, and Z, because we are registered as a BC society under the Societies Act, which empowers us with, and it's a great trust. It's a sacred trust in my mind. When people donate money to you, they donate it to the foundation for a purpose, and we honor that purpose. But we also have to promise that the funds we accept will only be used for the purposes for which we are empowered as a society. And they are very specific. So I think it's reasonable to list them here so everybody understands. So the purposes of the society are to organize or participate in environmental projects designed to A, preserve and protect flora and fauna, B, preserve and protect and restore rivers, lakes, wetlands, groundwater, and marine areas, and C, to improve the rural and or urban environments. Secondly, we are encouraged to work on and allowed to issue receipts for to educate and increase the public's understanding of the environment and or community development by offering presentations and seminars, by collecting and disseminating information on those topics, and by providing educational resources to students on those topics. And 3, to enhance educational opportunities at primary, secondary, and post-secondary levels through the provision of scholarships and support funds to students in registered Canadian education institutions. So you can see this covers an awful lot of ground, some of which can be worked on at the level of appealing to people's knowledge base, appealing to their hearts and minds, and also some of it involved very large dollars in forms of paying for covenants or even purchase of land. So we have been involved in some of these areas, and we are diligently working towards involvement in others.
Knowing the risk of mentioning names, and that one would be left out, and the one that was key to this organization and still is Carol Carman, who has been 2 or 3 times our president, and I know is our chief publicist, and she is the one who began the monthly letters to the news.
And that's a wonderful segue, because as we go through the third item in what we're going to cover this morning, it's what we do, how we work, and what are some of our sample accomplishments. I've asked our hosts here at CIRC to help us kind of go through a series of slides, maybe 15 seconds per slide, just showing some accomplishments from the years 2017 to 2022. And that very first slide, you see a smiling picture of Carol Carman. She's with 2 of the staff from Westmont Montessori, and she is in the process of giving them, for their students, our first edition of waterproof nature cards, which allows the kids to use them outside in nature-based learning. And then Lori, could you take us to the next slide, please? So here's another thing we were doing, in particular over the years 2017 to 2019. It was equipping our local elementary schools with ways to get kids out in nature. And here we had really the whole enchilada. It's a sample of a backpack that we filled with magnifying glasses and bird guides and our cards. And we were delighted to share those with our local elementary schools. Next slide, please. And here's our very own Mr. Pratt, receiving thanks from teachers at Hans Helgeson. And the little green rain boots show up really well. The blue rain pants and the blue raincoat, not quite so much. But the idea here was to provide Hans Helgeson kids and other elementary school kids with the means of getting outside in all seasons. So next slide, please. And this was the way, or this is one of the ways the kids at Hans Helgeson expressed their thanks, was this lovely picture of them all donned up in their rain pants and rain boots. So a lovely little picture we keep in our archives. Next picture, please. So another thing that we have been supporting over the years is what are called our annual BioBlitz activities, where citizen scientists from Metchosin head out with experts and look at our flora, our fauna, our birds, our mammals, our fungi, our flowers, to determine, so how rich are we in biodiversity? And this picture of the 2018 Spring BioBlitz team, Morley Milne is in its center, and it's really worthwhile recognizing the central importance, the central role that Morley played in the early years of the foundation. So through their work, as of this year, we are now at over 3,600 species documented as living here in Metchosin. Next slide, please. So in addition to doing the bio blitzes and the walk room talks, we had orientations, and we support orientations around backyard biodiversity. And this was the preamble to our May 2019 bio blitz. Next slide, please. So again, in terms of public education and public engagement in relation to nature, we, the foundation, have also been long-term sponsors of Metchosin Talk and Walk series, and one from 2019 featured local seaweeds. Next, please. And speaking of citizen science, one of our longer running projects now is the Metchosin insect biomass study, which is patterned after a similar multi-year study in Germany, where we are taking a long learning view of the insect life in the community and its biomass through different years and different seasons. Here you see Neville Winchester from UVic, because UVic is our partner on this, getting folks ready for the 2020 season kickoff. Next slide, please. So this picture here is not a pop tent. What it is a Malaysia trap. It's a elegant trap that allows us to capture sample insects in bottles of ethanol, which we change out every couple of weeks, and then Neville takes them back to the lab and figures out what's in there, what's the biomass and what are the species. Next slide, please. So for the first year of the pandemic, we had a lovely opportunity provided to us by artist and author Gretchen Markle to raise money through the sale of her very beautiful journal, Early Mornings at Whitty's Lagoon, through the first months of the original pandemic. And this was just a wonderful piece of art, and it really emphasized how important our green spaces and our blue spaces were in helping all of us to cope during the stress of the pandemic. We still have copies of the journal for sale, and it is a truly inspiring piece of work. Next slide, please. And going further with our joint ventures in the realm of art and nature, Valerie, maybe you want to say a couple words about ArtPod and the Artie Bird Card project?
Well, I don't know if I would do it any better than you. You did a great job, but I think it's wonderful to be involved with this type of activity because it speaks to people, not just with their brains, but also with our hearts. And the Artie Bird cards are all different. Each one's done by different artists here in Metchosin. And they were used in very innovative ways with Joan Rosenberg and, was it Mehmet?
Yeah, Mehmet Burnett.
Yeah, yes, organized almost like treasure hunt kind of activities with large versions of these. Children and their families went looking for them, and also connected with local businesses this way. So this was our second production of different type of cards. So first the general nature cards, which were fairly didactic and were actual pictures from nature, whereas these ones were artists' impressions. So they're also quite accurate, some of them, but with the individual stamp of the artist on them. And I don't know, do you have the mushroom cards next? Or?
Yeah, so let's continue.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks, Valerie.
Here's one of the activities.
Yeah, so this was the the treasure hunt involving the bird cards. And then I'm just checking our time. Lori, I'll try and move through our slides a little more quickly, but as as Valerie noted, those bird cards were used for some pretty cool social activities, again, during the pandemic. Next slide, please. And back to a little more citizen science, but also media coverage. This is a picture of Dr. Shannon Birch, who is a recognized expert in mycology, or the study of mushrooms and fungi. And she's being interviewed by, I think in this case it was CTV, maybe Czech. And she's being interviewed at Sea Bluff Farm regarding a study that we supported as the Metchosin Foundation, looking at the mycorrhizal fungi, the underground fungi associated with the roots of Gary oak. And a shout out to Sea Bluff Farm for letting us use their venue. Next slide, please.
I'm going to hop in slightly, Morgan, because I think that illustrates something about the Metchosin Foundation, as in, what are we?
Mhm.
So we're different from a club in that some of the time we sometimes are actually doing things, like our members are actually participating in things that they love. But sometimes we are, I use just not in a derogatory term, but we are raising funds so that others may do. So the Gary Oak study was, mycorrhizal study was one. No member of the foundation was actually in the field, actually digging or doing any of the background reading or research. We were approached, can you help us do this? It has the following benefits for Metchosin. And we said, yes, this seems to go along with our purpose. And we do have the funds this year, so we're happy to help. So sometimes we actually do, sometimes we just give funds, and sometimes we do both.
And that's a good segue for this
This
image,
one.
actually, if you want to talk to that.
So this is Morley's Meadow, the Gary Oak Meadow, which is right next to the municipal, not the municipal hall. I'm still getting this, the community hall. It's the municipal hall where the meetings are held. And this is an ongoing project with incredible volunteer activity hours. I know Bev Hall on our foundation is, but there's another lady she works with, and I'm going to
And I
blank.
think Marilee is actually on the
Okay,
on
I'll
the
call
call
now,
here,
and
which is
thank you
great.
for everything you do. It is absolutely beautiful. It is a work in progress, as is nature, of course, right? So it's fine that the meadow evolves, because that's the idea, and it's a wonderful way of honoring Morley.
It is. Also a really good opportunity to give a shout out to Katie Nelson,
That's the
who
name
was
I'm
a
missing.
tremendous volunteer along with Marilee, along with Bev. I think any given day you walk by the meadow, Katie Nelson is there.
Yeah.
Next slide, please. Valerie, maybe you wouldn't mind taking this one about our December fundraising.
Yes, it's nice to say our fundraising. It was fundraising that was done on our behalf, for which we are extremely grateful to those at Bilston Creek Farm. It was an amazing event. It connected us to people with whom we would never have made connections in the community. It was a silent auction and a live auction, and it managed to raise over $15,000 for the foundation, which enabled us to actually to support again the insect project and the meadow funds and Gary Oaks. Chris had mentioned the early days working with the support from the Victoria Foundation, and I think this is a reasonable point to say that thanks to the endowments that we have with the Victoria Foundation, the income from such an endowment gives us enough funds, and we don't use a lot of funds, for administrative support, things that we need on an annual basis just to keep us going. We don't have lights, we don't have rent, we don't pay any staff, so it is minimal. But we can definitely say that any money that is donated to our foundation, 100% of that will go towards projects, because we do not need any funds for administrative support at this time. So huge shout out to Bilston Creek Farm in this event. They did a wonderful job, and it was a great opportunity for us to connect with community also.
Excellent. Lori, next slide, please. So,
You can skip over that slide right
we
away.
recognize that person.
Yes.
So this is kind of bringing us forward to a project we have been supporting quietly but diligently for over 3 years. And so the Metchosin Foundation, like much of our community, has aspired to find a way to see the extraordinary ecosystem of Mary Hill conserved. And it appears there may be an opportunity to do just that, working collaboratively with Chanu First Nation, Pearson College, Habitat Acquisition Trust, and the District of Metchosin. We played a fundamental early role from the years, well, from January 19 up until February of 2022, when this photo of Valerie was taken. And our role was really being the catalyst, the connector, and nurturing the current main parties to the Mary Hill project such that they are up and running. The potential feasibility has been basically established. And so now we can kind of pull back in our nurturing role. Anyway, it was a very nice day in February, Valerie, when you were speaking to the assembled crowd in which the standstill agreement was announced. I don't know.
It was an honor to represent the foundation, and be an honor for the foundation to be there. So it was a very special day.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is our reminder, Lori, that you can click over to the big video now so we can hear a little bit about the Mary Hill project right from some of the partners. And I don't think we're seeing the video, Lori, we're just hearing the audio. We can't see the video. We can, we were just hearing some of the music from it. You may need to close this screen share. You may need to close this screen share and open a new one. Well, folks, while we're seeing if we can get the video up and running, I would also point out that there has recently been created a Mary Hill website, and the address for that website is maryhillipa.ca. And if we have any trouble getting this video up and running here today, it's a 3-minute and 30-second clip, which you can access via that Mary Hill project website. And again, that is maryhillipa.ca.
Mary Hill's a land that's held by Department of National Defense that's up for disposal.
Yeah, no, we're getting the audio, but we're not. Lori would have to change the screen share to get out of this and then.
Try that.
Okay. Okay.
Oh,
Henry Church from Beach Street First Station.
Change the chat.
okay, well, it's showing that it's.
Good.
So for those watching, we're trying some technical changes in order to allow the video to be shown.
Hopefully we'll be able to start a new screen share just with the video, but it may be that it takes too much memory. We'll see.
The elders and a treaty negotiator for Beach Bay. First of all, I'd like to say, welcome to our territory. Mary Hill's a land that's held by Department of National Defense that's for disposal, and we are the territory it's in, and it belonged to us for a long, long period of time. The vision for sharing is turned into an IPA, an Indigenous Protected Area.
So here on Mary Hill, we have a really pristine example of the last of the old growth coastal Douglas fir forests. And there's actually less than 1% left of the original extent of coastal Douglas fir. And we found through GIS analysis that this is 15% of what's left of old growth coastal Douglas fir. So it's really significant, and the chance to protect it for future generations is a really important one.
So I look at this as a triple bottom line deal, much bigger, +1 almost. You have economic development, community, and environmental, plus you're adding education. A lot of people talk about reconciliation, sit at the coffee shop and talk about how to reconcile. In Metchosin and the Western communities, Beecher Bay, we don't just sit at the coffee table and talk about how to reconcile. We actually get together, collaborate, do great things like take Mary Hill Parcel and turn it into an IPA that we're all going to work on, that we're going to govern over and do real things on the ground. It's not just about talking, it's about doing.
What's happening here is an attempt to achieve something that most of us never really thought was possible. And that is be able to preserve a part of our community that is extremely important to us, and also enhance the ability of Beecher Bay to have a sound financial basis.
And when we talk about what Beecher Bay is contributing to this project, it's so much more than just the land. It's about all that the land means to this community that has had so much happen to them in the past 200 years. Now we have a way that we remain whole, and it's going to bring communities together. That's the biggest part I like, is that we're going to work together. We're going to achieve something that could benefit all of us.
There's two outcomes here. The first outcome is that Beecher Bay buys this and then develops it in order to make good on the financial needs that they have. And if it has to come to that, then I support that. The other outcome is the opportunity to have what I consider to be at least a national class park, and probably another partnership similar to our last one that's never been done before. So the sky's almost the limit on this one.
Nice being in the forest like this. I haven't been in a forest like this in many years, and the land here is so beautiful, and the kids are enjoying themselves. It's something you don't see very often.
My name is Halima Ahmed from the Cheyenne Nation, and my favorite part of the woods is the water. About seeing animals being healthy.
Okay, well, thank you very much to our technical wizards who managed to get that very large video to run. It'll probably run a little bit better if you click right on the Maryhill Project website when you're next browsing Google, but that gives you a little bit of a flavor. Now, while we were watching that video, Chris reminded me that there are, of course, other people that we want to give a shout out to in terms of how we do our work and who helps. So it's a really appropriate moment to recognize Nicole Lalonde, who recently retired as our treasurer, but for many years before that was our pro bono bookkeeper. So Chris, thank you for remembering that. And now,
and if I may just,
yeah.
but Bev Hall, who has systematically kept our minutes, kept our records, and been an active member of the Moralees Meadow restoration, and continues to be a strong supporter of our activities.
You bet. So I'm going to ask Lori and Helen to please return to screen sharing the slide deck. And while you tee that up, I think we can just talk a little bit more about how we work before we get into our challenges. So one of the things that defines, thank you, that's exactly where we want to start. One of the things that defines how we work is a recognition that our aspirations are rather large relative to the size of our organization. So a very great deal of what we do is accomplished through informal partnerships. You just saw an example of that when we were looking at the Maryhill project. That is a very large project, as outgoing Mayor Rands noted. Really, it is potentially a national class project, a little bit beyond our scope as a very small local foundation, but we work very hard to bring in other partners on that. And that was really our role. And so one of the ways we work, one of the ways we overcome the challenges of being pretty small with big aspirations is to seek partnerships, whether it's with local governments, whether it's with academic institutions, other nonprofits. We do it all. So the next thing we wanted to just touch on is the topic of land stewardship. And in that regard, for many years, we have been sponsors of stewardship programs that are delivered by Habitat Acquisition Trust. Habitat Acquisition Trust mandate area runs from Port Renfrew to the Gulf Islands, but we've been successful in having them focus quite a bit of their work here in Metchosin through active partnership and funding contribution from the Metchosin Foundation. And Valerie, before we get into land stewardship, maybe I can turn it over to you just to talk a little bit more about some of our challenges and opportunities, kind of framing it.
Well, there are many challenges, and I think anybody watching this is aware of them. The challenge, the pressure on Metchosin land is enormous. People have to live somewhere. People deserve to live somewhere. We certainly acknowledge that. We also acknowledge that the people in Metchosin are here for a special reason, or many special reasons, and one of those reasons is the love for the land, and the love for the land as we know it, or we have come to love it. Chris talked about the early foundation of the foundation, and one of the thoughts at the time is the foundation was needed as a place where people who wish to could either leave land or something as a legacy. Then it was felt to be important that that was in Metchosin, because it carried with it a great element of trust, that people felt more comfortable leaving something to those who actually that it be administered by those who actually lived in Metchosin and loved Metchosin. So that is one aspect that the foundation has, and is certainly available to those who wish to connect with us, either individually through Morgan or myself, or contact us through the Metchosin Foundation website. Challenges exist in many, many areas, but they always come with opportunity. Sometimes you get more different things out of chaos than you do out of things rolling along just at the same speed. So we welcome the opportunity to talk with people from different municipalities, from different walks of life, and on different levels, because in order to conserve land or be good stewards of the land, one doesn't necessarily need to own it. People need to learn to love it and know how to take care of it, but we will work, whether it's on a covenant level, helping level. There's many different levels other than actually owning something.
Thank you. And I guess just before we move to the next slide, I'll provide a bit of an example of that. So over the past 3 months, the Metchosin Foundation has been working with a landowner in the Albert Head Lagoon area, assisting that landowner in coming up with a customized covenant to protect a beautiful piece of, just a half-acre piece of beautiful forest on his property that backs onto the lagoon. And so that, in addition to connecting people with third parties and to raising money to fund things like covenants, in this case, what we did was we worked with the landowner to help him come up with a customized covenant through a third party. So that's, kind of other opportunities that we can bring to the table. And now I'm going to ask our host to move us to the next slide, which describes a very large aspiration looking ahead, looking toward the future. So it's evident when you look at in particular, the boundaries on our northern side, when you look at Langford and you look at Colwood, the pace of development there is very rapid, and it's coming right up to our boundaries. And those boundaries are more and more being defined by clear cuts and open gravel pits and the like. So we have been thinking over the past year about putting together a project that would create a long-term legacy for Metchosin through the development over probably a multi-year period of a planned biodiversity corridor that could take us from the Sioux Hills Regional Wilderness Park Reserve in the northwest portion of our community, basically where Highway 14 cuts through, all the way through to our beloved Whitty's Lagoon Park, and to work with willing landowners in a variety of ways to see a vision like this accomplished over a period of a few years. And we could do that working with willing landowners through a variety of different mechanisms. One would be the establishment of conservation covenants on pertinent properties. The other would be working with other conservation agencies in partnership to be able to pull together the money to do an outright land acquisition. Another would be, if we were so fortunate, to be the recipients of real estate as a charitable gift through a life estate, for example. And then last and not least, I think with forward-looking local governments, be that in Metchosin or Colwood or Langford, or all three of them working collaboratively, the notion of subdivision amenity planning, whereby we might be able to achieve important green space by concentrating any housing development on the less ecologically sensitive portions of a particular portion in a large property, leaving other portions aside for conservation. So it's a big, you might call it a big, hairy, audacious goal, but we wanted to close off this portion of the presentation today just by allowing folks to see one possible view of a big goal that we could have for the future working together. And I believe that this is our last slide before we move to thanks and questions. Anything you'd want to add, Valerie, before we move it over to thanks and Q&A?
So a couple of things. It's a big dream. It's a wonderful dream. We have to approach it cautiously, because one thing we are not allowed to do under our purposes is to lobby individual governments in any particular direction. We can make statements, but we can't actively advocate. That is the political word I'm looking at. And so Chris.
I'd just like to add, just reflecting on the presentation that has gone, perhaps we haven't spoken clearly enough about our relationship with our friends who live at Beecher Bay, the Skianu people, which began really with our beginnings with Morley and her husband, who reached out, he through improving communications, which was his work throughout the province, but Morley also with the people who were there, and it has continued. We have also perhaps not mentioned the annual scholarships that we were able to fund. And we always have a few because we feel it's so important that the young people who are growing up here learn to love or come to love or continue to love Metchosin the way the older folks do, and to let the Skianu people feel that they are part of Metchosin too, and the scholarships have gone to members from their school, from their land, as well as other Metchosinites. So it's not a major contribution, but it's an important one.
No, absolutely, Chris. And so in fact, one of the scholarships is specifically designated for Beecher Bay. And this year, thanks to the generosity of donors in the last few years, we were able to increase the amount of each of those scholarships to $1,000 each. So you're right, it's not all of tuition, but it does reach the appropriate number of zeros at the end, so it's helpful.
Very nice wrap up. Lori, could you please take us to our last slide? So I think this is thank you very much to CERC for providing this opportunity for us, and open floor or open screen for any questions folks may have. And Helen, we'll turn it over to you to be the moderator of any incoming questions.
Yes, please do call in if you have any questions. You can also put something on the chat and Lori will make sure that we see it.
So while that's coming through, I think one of the things you had up there, Helen, was how can people help or get involved?
Yes.
So we are a foundation, and one of the major things we do is to raise money. So if people are so inclined and they wish to, first of all, find out more about us, either through our website or contact one of the directors, we're happy to do that. People can donate to an individual project if they wish. If you want to say, I would like my money to go to citizen science, I would like my money to go to scholarships, we can honor that request. We can if people, so we do have some donors who give monthly through Canada Helps. We have people who sort of have us on their list for their annual end of year, who shall I donate to this year? And that's also very well received and with our great thanks. Sometimes when, as a foundation, we're faced with, can we support this? Do we have the funds to support this? Then the next question is, yes, we have the funds. Should we support this? Right? More often than not, it's perhaps we should support this, but can we? As in we don't have the fund. And the third one, which is hardest to fundraise for, but is so important for a foundation, is we need to have funds on hand, undesignated, so that if something comes up, which is a really big, yes, we should support this. In order to help Metchosin, we should support this. And we need, sometimes there's an urgency to those funds. And that's when we most need our undesignated support.
Thank you, Valerie. That was really clear, very helpful. Are there any questions? Mary Lee?
Hi, I was just wondering if you have anything planned for the future with regard to more work in the elementary schools.
So thank you for that question. Yes, and I can't be more specific than the yes, but certainly we are actually having a meeting tonight, and we are realizing that our backpacks were a number of years ago now, and that cohort of students has moved through. So we will be discussing what would be an appropriate and who we should be discussing with, because we don't want to presume to know what teachers necessarily want or need. But yes, absolutely. And we have been also approached over the summertime, and we will be following up for next year by some summer camps. They had heard about some of our work and were interested in our products. So we will be looking at the elementary schools and probably the campers.
As a follow-up, I was just wondering what your plans might be to include youth from the Beecher Bay Reserve and also our local high schools. Because I feel, we're such an aging population that we need to be recruiting our young people to take up the cause of preservation.
So Marilee, I'm more than happy to try to answer on the Beecher Bay, on the Chanu side of things. So we've developed a pretty good relationship with Beecher Bay administration, in particular the Beecher Bay Learning Center. And the Beecher Bay Learning Center hosts two different groups of kids. They basically host elementary school kids, and then they host high school, junior high school youth. And we as a foundation have been engaged with both. We've mostly been engaged with them in relation to preparation for our scholarship program, but also for some of the educational programs related to youth, and through our sponsorship of some of the work that HAT does. We have been involved in HAT's Beecher Bay youth team that does ecosystem restoration out on some of the Chanu lands, for example, on Rocky Point Peninsula. So we're building that relationship. We have not pulled them into stuff related to Metchosin yet, but obviously the Mary Hill project would be an ideal opportunity. And Valerie or Chris, I don't know if you want to answer the other side of that equation.
For the local high schools.
Yeah, for local high schools.
I would say that we have not explored that. And thank you for the question. That's one of the advantages of doing this type of thing, because all ideas are welcome.
Thanks, Marilee. Any other questions?
So Marilee, just following up, since I don't see anybody else's hand up right now, I have spent some time hiking in the valleys in northern Italy, and I know that the students in the high schools there do most of the species counting, species identification, walking through the valleys. It's just a part of their curriculum and what they do. Yeah.
And then I'll build even a little bit more on that. I was just meeting earlier this week, Marilee and others, with representatives from Pearson College. And we were all lamenting the fact that we are no longer having Metchosin Days, that there's been a real gap in our community. And when we had Metchosin Days, it was a great opportunity for the Pearson students to connect with the Metchosin community and find ways of engaging and supporting our community. So I think the opportunity now may be for us, the Metchosin Foundation, and for others as us in Metchosin to reach out to Pearson in the absence of that vehicle of Metchosin Days to say, hey, if your student body wants to engage with us in ways that might include, for example, ecosystem restoration or stewardship, have we got ideas for you? So, okay.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, please? Okay, your presentation was, is there a question? Just a sec.
Norm Hardy. Yeah.
The work of the Metchosin Foundation is inspirational. That's a great way to end this program. Every slide you showed just led to more and more information and more ideas. It became quite exciting. Thank you very much, all of you, Chris, Morgan, and Valerie. I really enjoyed your presentation. I'm sure it'll be watched many times by people once we post it on YouTube. And one more thing, please, everyone who watched, will you fill out a survey with your feedback? The link is in the chat box and will pop up in your browser at the end of this Zoom event.
Thank you.
Thank you for the
Yeah,
opportunity, Helen.
absolutely.
Thank you very much.
And I think there may be a new comment from Norm, another one. Yeah.
Heather Hood, thank you so much.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for watching.
Thank you.
Does that mean Deirdre is saying something that it's highlighted or not necessarily? No?
Oh, I was just saying thank you, Valerie.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank
Deirdre.
you.
Have
Thank
to
you
stop
very
meeting
much.
like this.